Europe was a land of monarchies. Hereditary nobility ruled over the peasantry, as was their God-given right. For centuries, the class-based society of rulers and the ruled continued without any meaningful change. However, in France, the class divide had gotten so immense, its rulers so incompetent, that the ruled had had enough. In 1789, the French Revolution had begun. The people of France banded against the monarchy and created the French Republic. The revolution brought many prominent intellectuals to influence, united by the idea of liberté, égalité, and fraternité, freedom, equality, and brotherhood, but split on the way to achieve it. While the intellectuals bickered and performed their reign of terror, Napoleon Bonaparte was tasked with leading the armed forces of the revolution to victory in several campaigns. Napoleon was an ambitious and brilliant military leader, whose prowess leading armies was unmatched. Napoleon's continuous success bolstered his popularity and influence until he was named first consul, leader of the French Republic via a coup d'etat. After being proclaimed the leader of the Republic, Napoleon had ended the revolutionary period by proclaiming himself as Emperor of the French, a hereditary monarchical position. And while he and his government would espouse virtues of the revolution, the Republican experiment of France had failed. Napoleon would take absolute control over the French state and lead military campaigns across the entirety of Europe, nearly subjugating the entire continent. However, Napoleon was eventually taken down by a coalition of the rest of Europe's great powers. In its stead, the monarchy was re-established, with the old order returning. The peace established by Metternich at the Council of Vienna had attempted to bring the old system of hereditary leaders and peasantry back to Europe. For a while, it seemed to have worked. However, the old order would soon fall and never return. As Alexis de Tocqueville would put it, "We are sleeping together in a volcano. A wind of revolution blows. The storm is on the horizon." Welcome to Aftershocks of the Revolutions Redux lore video number 2, The Rise and Fall of Socialism in France. I'm really excited to show you everything that we have here today. I recommend that you check out our first episode, the Germany lore video, just so that you get caught up to date about some of the other events that have been revealed so far from the lore. With that being said, let's get into this new video, and be sure to give it a like if you like it. Alexis de Tocqueville had correctly predicted the tide of revolution approaching France. Despite his aristocratic background, he and other Parisian liberals were devoted to the idea of a liberal republic. These idealists would be a major thorn in the side of the continuous attempts for the conservatives to restore a monarchy in France, with each enlightened monarch facing some sort of political scandal leading to a change in government. Another group of people who were desperately hoping for a revolution were the workers of France. Supporting the liberals in their attempts to oust the monarchy at every turn, many were beginning to have enough of the idea of compromising with the liberals. Instead, many French workers were yearning for socialism, an idea which had been gaining more and more traction. Nowadays, if you hear that somebody is a socialist, it often means that they are a Marxist. While Marx and his theories grew to be the most prevalent and the inspiration of all communist revolutions ever since, at this point in time, the debate about socialism, what it was, and how it was meant to be achieved was mixed between several different philosophers. While this was a time of renaissance for socialist thought, it also had meant that the means to achieve socialism were mixed, with no socialist theory reigning supreme over one another. However, the liberals and socialists would get their opportunity to stage another revolution, as 1848 changed everything. But funnily enough, the straw to break the camel's back would be a banning of dinner parties. These dinner parties were more than just visits at your parents' house. They were grand-scaled conventions meant to encourage discussion, often criticizing the government, and promoting Republican ideals. This angered Louis-Philippe and resulted in him and his Prime Minister, François Guizot, to ban them altogether. This outright insult against the liberal institution of freedom of speech led to significant unrest in Paris. In just 2 days after the banning of the dinner parties, Louis had abdicated, and the Second French Republic was proclaimed. This revolution in France was the first revolution of the period known as the Springtime of Nations, the 1848 revolutions. After France, Hungary began an independence revolt, and German liberals began their attempt to unify Germany. While the revolutions were ongoing, the Second Republic would not last. For the cities of France were liberal and left-leaning, the rural folk were in league with the conservatives, who yearned for the olden days under Napoleon, where France was the undisputed hegemon of the continent. When the electorate was expanded past the wealthy liberals of Paris, the French people elected Napoleon III as their president. He soon afterwards seized executive power to become a dictator, and soon after that, he proclaimed the Second French Empire in 1852. Yet again, another attempt to establish a liberal republic was dashed. By the time Napoleon III had consolidated his rule and proclaimed the Second Empire, the history of Europe had radically changed due to our point of divergence. In our history, the Hungarian and German revolutions had failed. The Russians had suppressed the Hungarian revolutions, and the two major powers of Prussia and Austria rejected the crown from the gutter. In Aftershocks of the Revolutions Redux's timeline, Russia supports the Hungarian Republic and seizes Galicia-Lodomeria from Austria. Thus, the Kaiser of Austria accepted the crown from the gutter, triggering an armed conflict for leadership in Germany, which ended in a stalemate with two rival German governments. With this alternate Europe, what would Napoleon's ambitions be? To answer that, we will look at his ambitions were in our history and make assumptions hereafter. Napoleon III was living in the shadow of his uncle, Napoleon I. How could he not? Napoleon had nearly subjugated the entire continent to his will, and now Napoleon III's supporters were demanding that he achieve the same level of greatness, if not more. To this end, Napoleon III would dictate a heavy industrialization program, attempting to emulate the industrial center of the world at the time, Great Britain. These works would significantly increase the industrial capability of France, but had the adverse effect of increasing socialist sympathy, as the factories brought the proletariat together in an unprecedented way. These industries would be used to improve the French army, the quality of which was incredibly important for his ambition to re-establish the natural borders of France, which included annexing the west bank of the Rhine, currently controlled by the Habsburg German Confederation. In order to achieve this annexation, Napoleon III had attempted to forge an alliance with the North German Federation. However, the relations would never result to a solid alliance, as the North German Federation had claimed this territory as well, as the Prussian state had lost it to the Habsburgs during the Bürgerkrieg. So, Napoleon III would continue to consolidate his rule, waiting for an opportunity to reclaim the glory of the First French Empire. He would get his opportunity when the Habsburg Germans had attempted to expand into the Benelux. In 1867, the Habsburg German Confederation demanded that the Netherlands concede the lands that they controlled that were a part of the German Confederation, Luxembourg and Limburg. While the Netherlands would actually concede defeat, Napoleon III refused to acknowledge the annexation, using Habsburg expansionism as a casus belli. Napoleon III would bring the French nation at war with the Habsburgs, with their true aim being the annexation of the west bank of the Rhine. And while not allies, the North German Federation declared war on the Habsburgs for the same reason. What was supposed to be an easy victory for the French versus the Germans turned into a slaughter. Napoleon III had only shared his uncle's name, leading to the utter destruction of his armies in the siege of Paris. In our history, Napoleon III had suffered a similar fate to this timeline's Napoleon III. In a war between France, Prussia, and other small German states, he led his armies to his capture, leading to a revolution abolishing the empire and the creation of the Third French Republic. In this alternate timeline, Napoleon III was not captured, and the war was much closer, as the Habsburg Germans were also fighting the North German Federation. Napoleon III would return to Paris, where he would attempt to raise an army of Parisians in order to re-attempt an invasion against the Habsburg Germans. However, in this alternate history, he would not avoid his fate. Due to the successes of the Hungarian and German revolutions in this timeline, the prominence of left-wing thought would be larger across the board, especially in France, where time after time, attempts to create a new republic were replaced with a constitutional monarchy favoring the rich. While Napoleon III would retreat to Paris in an attempt to continue the war, the left wing of France would see their opportunity to execute their own revolution, not dominated by the conservative romanticists or rich liberals, but a republic of the people. The communards of Paris would imprison Napoleon III and proclaim the Third French Republic, the People's Republic of France, under prominent revolutionary Louis Charles Deleschuze. The French Empire was now in utter turmoil, their armies utterly crushed as their head of state was imprisoned by radical republicans and still at war with the Habsburg Germans. A provisional government was proclaimed as they quickly sued to the Habsburgs for peace, conceding Alsace-Lorraine to them. Habsburg Germany was ecstatic at this news, as now the armies that they had committed to the French front were now free to move to the Eastern Front with the North German Federation. Unlike in our history, where the Prussians would partake in the crushing of the leftist Parisians, the Habsburg Germans could not afford to support the provisional French government, and left them to their fate. This left France split between two groups, a provisional government loyal to the emperor, and a new socialist republic, centered in Paris, both claiming to be the rightful government. The French Civil War had begun. Urban centers with significant industrialization projects were quickly swayed to the socialist Republican government, as the workers of these factories sought to finally have representation in a government made for them. Liberals may have preferred another republic, but were split between participating in this particular form of government and reform of the Second French Empire, while remnants of the army and remaining conservatives rallied behind the empire. While having the army on your side would normally be something that would guarantee your success, Napoleon III had already eliminated that threat for the socialists by marching them to their deaths against the Habsburgs. The industrious cities of France would create weaponry for the workers, leaving no chance for the empire loyalists to succeed. After 2 years of fighting, the last imperial forces were destroyed. Napoleon III was tried for his crimes against France and was executed. The first socialist republic of the world was proclaimed, and without any forces to contest their authority. With the ascendance of the first socialist republic of the world, the workers of the world were ecstatic. Marx had predicted that the first socialist republic would be in an industrious nation like Britain or France, and while not coming true in our history, was absolutely correct in this timeline. Marx and his teachings began gaining significant legitimacy. He would even emigrate to France in order to aid in the development of socialism in this young state. A fate much brighter for the philosopher than exile in Britain, where he would not live to see his dreams a reality. Paris had become the shining beacon of socialism in a world where such movements were suppressed. And while the young state would be admired by the workers of France and the socialists of the world, the remaining old order monarchies and reactionary republics would look at France with disgust. In order for France to survive as a socialist republic, they needed to be moderate in their approach and implementation of socialism and make alliances with even the most socially regressive of states like the North German Federation. With their abandonment of the imperial claim to the western bank of the Rhine River, the North German Federation became the French People's Republic's first ally in a world that would much rather see socialism die. However, this alliance would clearly not last a victory over the Habsburg Germans, as their ideologies were far too different. In order to gain allies in this world of reaction, the French People's Republic would need to create them. France began inviting revolutionary Republican movement leaders from across the world to be educated in socialist ideals, and supported their insurgent actions in order to create new revolutions and therefore new allies. The socialist Pan-Italian Revolution that had only managed to unite about half of the peninsula, the Young Turks turning socialist and succeeding in gaining control of Anatolia, and a stabilized Republic of China under Sun Yat-sen. While France was the first socialist republic of the world, Their method of revolution and the ideological division of France made it much different than any communist revolution that we would think of today. In our history, the Bolshevik Revolution had set the precedent for all subsequent communist revolutions, with every communist following their example by establishing a one-party state, abolishing private property, and strictly enforcing a policy of collectivization with an economy controlled by the government directly. In this alternate history, there was not any unifying ideology or leader like Lenin, and the dominant movement of the Socialists of Paris was to simply establish a democratic republic, not a single-party vanguard state. The call for a republic was answered by the workers of France, but also the liberals. This had meant while France was a socialist country, it still had the internal legacy of a capitalist system. There were still many business owners, private property, and capitalist political parties within their state. While there were many calls for radical leftists to ban private property and nationalize the assets of the petite bourgeoisie, these radicals would not gain enough political power to enforce their will. Instead, moderate measures would be undertaken with the goal of eventually phasing out capitalism altogether. Things like heavy tax burdens on the upper strata and the gradual nationalization of key industries would play into the molding of the utopia that the socialists had all strided for, even if they disagreed on the methods. The liberals who supported the People's Republic of France were increasingly disenfranchised. The small business owners that would make up the majority of their support base would be accused of reactionism whenever they wished for these socialist reforms to be rolled back, oftentimes leading to their imprisonment and exile to penal colonies away from the mainland, where they would detain liberal extremists and devout monarchists alike. Over time, the People's Republic began to act in the same way that all of the other oppressive empires had before. Liberals and conservatives in hiding would continue to adapt to the times, while keeping their ideals hidden, significantly impacting the development of the far right of this timeline in comparison to our history. As the French People's Republic stabilized and continued to exert its anti-imperial influence across the globe, it retained its alliance with the North German Federation. Nearly 3 decades had passed since the Luxembourg War, and tensions were once again growing in Europe. The Italian People's Republic, essentially a sister republic to the French, was yearning to complete the unification of the peninsula. However, the Habsburg client state of Lombardy-Venetia and the Kingdom of Two Sicilies were both under Habsburg German protection. The Russian Empire had also begun attempting to increase its sphere of influence in the Balkans. However, their attempts were continuously foiled by the ascendant Hungarian Republic, who had managed to avoid subjugation by the Russians. The Hungarian Republic had just managed to secure an alliance with Habsburg Germany by conceding the German-majority Burgenland to them, creating a faction known as the Central Powers. Russia was seeking allies to partake in the destruction of the Hungarian Republic, and they would seek to join the French North German Alliance. This alliance between Russia, the North German Federation, France, and Italy would come to be known as the Entente. After an assassination of the Serbian president by Russian loyalist forces, the Great War had begun between these two factions. The leftists of France were in extreme jubilation at the outbreak of the war. Marx's prediction of the socialist revolution beginning in France was correct. But that was not his only prediction. He predicted that the revolution would then spread to the rest of the world following the revolution in France. This Great War nearly included all the great European powers, and it was the perfect opportunity for France to spread the workers' revolution to the capitalist countries of the world. And thus, France began heavy mobilization efforts in order to kickstart the world revolution. This obviously had meant that the French would need to turn on their reactionary allies. So instead of making their ambitions obvious, they instructed revolutionaries within the capitalist nations of the Entente to halt any revolutionary activities until the end of the war. The French had managed to advance fairly well into Alsace-Lorraine. However, the Germans had created heavy fortifications in the region, making advancement into the industrial region of the Rhine extremely difficult. France would then support Italian ambitions to unify the peninsula, hoping the unification of Italy would cause the southern front of Germany to become overwhelmed and succumb to revolution themselves. Things were going well, until France had noticed that the German convoy raiders had managed to reach far further than their naval bases would allow. After investigation, it had been revealed that Spain was allowing Germany to dock their navy in their ports. France had demanded this cease. Spain refused, and thus France had invaded Spain, calling on the socialists of the country to rise up against their government. While this had initially succeeded, especially due to the socialistic Catalonians being supported by the French, this front also ended up being a stalemate, with France running out of troops to perform any meaningful offensives alongside their numerous fronts. France would then increase conscription and began mobilizing their economy to the detriment of the living standards of the nation. This had also meant that the government of France was nationalizing the factories of the petite bourgeoisie to repurpose them for military goods. This practice was extremely unpopular among the business owners of France, and thus they began rebelling. The liberals and conservatives that had gone into hiding began insurgency measures against the French People's Republic and sought German aid in the destruction of the socialist-dominated republic. This delicate balance between the government and the petite bourgeoisie began to crumble as France desperately continued to put their all into the mobilization of their country. After the success of the North German Federation's offensive to encircle East Frisia, Habsburg Germany's North Atlantic naval base, the French People's Republic had devised a war plan which, while extremely risky, would have guaranteed the destruction of Habsburg Germany, becoming the first domino in a world revolution if they were to succeed. In order to break through the fortifications of Alsace-Lorraine, France would circumvent them, blitzing through the Ardennes forest of Belgium, arming the proletariat of the Rhineland, and linking up the armored units with the forces of the North German Federation. Invading Belgium would mean that the British Empire would join a war against them. France is aware of this, so they had sent strict instructions to the Revolutionary of the Isles to instigate a revolution against the British. France had begun their daring maneuver through Belgium, managing to break through German territory. Once Britain had joined in the defense of Belgium, the Socialist Republicans of Ireland had risen up and declared independence. British labor movements had also begun arbitrating for the end of the monarchy and the establishment of a republic. While fervorous, the revolutions in Britain had only managed to gain more sympathy for the reactionaries and did not prove a substantial enough threat to prevent British mobilization. The decision to attempt a daring blitz through Germany would lead to the ultimate destruction of the Entente by the Central Powers. Russia soon fell to the forces of the Hungarians, who propped up independence movements against the Empire in Poland and Ukraine. The petite bourgeoisie of Russia had deposed the monarchy and separately pieced out of the war. In reaction to this, Lenin and the Bolsheviks, the socialist cell that the French had installed in Russia, attempted to cause a revolution in favor of war with the Central Powers. In our history, the Bolsheviks were actually anti-war. Their slogan of peace, land, and bread had swayed many of the Russians to the side of the Bolsheviks. However, in this alternate history, Lenin and his supporters would see the World War as the only way to guarantee the world revolution, and thus, the Bolsheviks would rise and fall as the Russian populace yearned for peace. The next nation of the Entente to fall was the North German Federation. Their previously secure eastern flank had quickly become enveloped by Hungarian and Polish forces as they marched into Silesia, their largest industrial sector. In order to ensure more lenient terms for peace, the North German Federation had also surrendered to the Central Powers. Now France was alone facing the might of the reactionary powers of Europe. Their armies had advanced on all their fronts. Their nation's economy was pushed to the absolute limit of mobilization. But despite all of this, the French did not surrender for a whole year. During that time, the full reign of the Red Terror would be brought down upon all the people of the nation. Adamant that if the French would continue to push forward, the world revolution would be achieved. Liberals, conservatives, and even moderate social democrats who were starting to call for peace were imprisoned. The rights of freedom of speech and assembly were temporarily suspended. The ruling Socialist Party was desperate for the war to continue. However, the French people had had enough. The total blockade that the British had subjected the French to had destroyed public trust of the government. And thus, the French People's Republic would face another revolution, where the democratic supporters who wished for the war to end took over and surrendered unconditionally to the Central Powers. In the end, the French People's Republic did not fulfill Marx's predictions and fell in the same way that it had risen. After the Fourth French Republic had been proclaimed, they expected a generous treatment from their adversaries. They were wrong. The Fourth Republic faced the strict conditions of the Treaty of Schönbrunn, which France would disarm, concede Greater Lorraine to the Habsburg Germans, Calais to Belgium, Savoy and Nice to the newly established Duchy of Piedmont, surrender all their colonies besides Algeria, and be subject to heavy war reparations. In order to prevent too much of their industry from falling into foreign hands, the government of the Fourth French Republic would encourage the re-establishment of the petite bourgeoisie, granting all the formerly imprisoned business owners of the French People's Republic their nationalized private property back. The workers of France, who had enjoyed guaranteed work and gratuitous subsidies for their well-being, had none of these rights anymore. The natural response would be to return them to their ideology of socialism. But many workers within France had become apathetic to socialism. If Marx was right about socialism beginning in France, why was he wrong about the World Revolution? The general apprehension of socialism and the time of imprisonment that the petite bourgeoisie had spent with the most radical right-wing extremists, and the apathy of the French worker to socialism, had laid the foundations for the birth of a new ideology. During the period of Red Terror, those fortunate enough to be imprisoned instead of executed were sent to the prisons in Algeria in order to stifle their influence in the mainland during the war effort. It is here where integralists like Charles Maurras would meet with others critical of the war effort like Alfred Georges Grisson, better known by his pen name Georges Valois. During these meetings, figures such as these would lay the ideological framework for the fascist movement of this alternate history, national syndicalism. The ideology attempted to bridge the gap between the nationalist movements that had been suppressed by the social democracy of the French People's Republic with the principles of socialism. After these ideological thinkers were released following the rise of the Fourth French Republic, Charles Maurras would go on to create the Action Française Party, a monarchist integralist party seeking to reverse the progress of the People's Republic and return France to an era of Catholic nationalism. Georges would not join Action Française, seeing it as too reactionary to ever be relevant in the Fourth Republic. Instead, Georges Valois would found the National Syndicalist Party, similar in ideology to integralism, without any of the romanticism of the olden kingdoms. The National Syndicalist Party would adopt a futuristic outlook. They branded themselves the ideology of the 20th century and ridiculed Marxist theory for being outdated and a failed experiment. The National Syndicalist Party would gain more traction and members, especially when its leader became François de Larocque, a veteran of the Great War. Larocque was extremely influential and popular to many. The veteran organization that he had led, the Cross of Fire, would become the National Syndicalist paramilitary arm, as the party began appealing to the French public to elect them to leadership. To the workers of France, they promised jobs and a revitalized economy. To the business owners, they promised the preservation of private property and the destruction of Marxism, as to never threaten their livelihoods again. To the military, they promised glory, that France would never be humiliated again. All these individuals would only need to submit their will to the state, so that the state could benefit them. Everything within the state, nothing outside the state, nothing against the state. For a while, the National Syndicalists would remain influential, but would consistently fail in elections. However, they would get their chance once the Frankfurt stock market crash of 1925 hit the Fourth French Republic. Due to France's dependence on Germany in order to keep their economy afloat, France was hit extremely hard by the Depression. Foreign investors would enact policies to drain the workers of France for everything that they had, and the government had instituted austerity measures, which included halting of the veterans' pensions. With the veterans of the Great War now without their pension, de Larocque had mobilized the Cross of Fire and the Nationalist Syndicalist Party to perform a march on Paris. Throughout the countryside, the protests, which had only been due to veterans' pay, had soon become a national revolution. As de Larocque entered Paris, he demanded the government submit to him and the National Syndicalists. He faced no resistance, as he and his supporters proclaimed the French state. As Marx reflected on the rise of the Second Empire, he said, "History repeats itself, first as tragedy, then as farce." And while he may have been referring to Napoleon III, de la Roque had proven himself a true successor to Napoleon's legacy, for Napoleon had couped the government in the same way, proclaiming himself consul for life. De la Roque had repeated history. For this, he would be affectionately and loathingly referred to as the Red Napoleon. The French economy was pushed to its absolute limit once again, with unemployment rapidly approaching 0%, with state-directed industry strictly focused on being prepared to go to war with Germany. National syndicalism began to propagate beyond its borders, as nationalist Italians within Piedmont soon took over the middling duchy in order to once again seek French assistance with uniting the peninsula. The Netherlands would be taken over by the ambitious Bernard, creating a one-party state exactly like France, with the goals of reclaiming the territories that had been carved out of them following the Luxembourg War. In a sick, twisted version of the People's Republic of France before them, the bourgeoisie would seek to join the new order that France had wished to impose upon Europe and the world. Socialism had fallen in France, and the unholy beast of national syndicalism had reared its head, seducing the proletariat of France to submit their freedom for security, trading their freedom for subjugation. While the French People's Republic has died, its legacy lives on. Across the world, different socialist movements have been inspired and supported by the First Workers' Republic. The Workers' Republic of America, the Chinese People's Republic, and the Union of Sura Socialist Republics all existed due to the former torchbearer of the revolution, France. The national French state appears strong and united, but factionalism within the party continues to grow despite the constant purges. Regardless of faction, each member of the National Syndicalist Party had wished to destroy the old order and restore French dominance over the continent. Would France prevail in its ambition to subjugate Europe? Or would foreign powers subjugate France permanently? Would Marxist thought die out completely? Or would the torchbearer socialists of the world return the fire home? You decide France's fate in Aftershocks of the Revolutions Redux. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it. It's a long one, but France is a really important nation in Aftershocks of the Revolutions, so I really wanted to make sure that we really delved into it. I really wanted to thank all the AOTR2 developers for all of your help. This video wouldn't have been possible without the graphics and the lore development that we've done together. I'm really excited to see how this project comes together. I'd like to let everybody know I have a YouTube membership now. I don't have anything in there yet, so I don't want to give any really big promises. But I do want to see if there are people interested in supporting me financially. So if you're interested in that sort of thing and you'd like long form alternate history content, please consider giving me a membership if you can afford it, of course. But yeah, anyway, that milk, yeah, I found myself in Italy. Now I'm in France. Yeah, I don't know how I ended up here, but I think if I want to go home, I'm going to have to go to Turkey. At least that's what some Bulgarian guy told me. Anyway, I'll see you in our next video.